Awesome. All right, we are starting. Okay, welcome everybody. We're in part two of our comprehensive, kind of informal Kantian critique of pure reason study. Last time we started on the first part in the introduction, and we're actually switching translations today because Cambridge edition kind of incomprehensible, and our good friend Patrick here has found us an accessible yet comprehensible version. Do you know which one this is, Patrick? I didn't look to see which one this was coming from.
Yeah, so this is the archive.org. It's just labeled Critique of Pure Reason, but the translator here, he's got a really hard to pronounce name. It's translated by J.M.D. Michael John. Okay, I think it might just actually be Michael John. It's just spelled weird.
Okay, cool. So if any of you want to find that, you can go ahead and honestly, I'll probably put the link in the description of wherever this
Good idea.
goes. Yeah. So so last time we sort of we figured we'd just skip ahead anyway, even though it's a new translation, because we went over really basic, elementary Kantian concepts, a priori, posteriori, some background context, rationalism, empiricism. So with all that in mind, I think we can go ahead and get started with the second section. Does anyone want to volunteer to? So kind of how we've been doing this. I don't know if you guys saw the recording of the last one. We kind of just read over the section and then we go back and just kind of go over it. Try to
We read over
it.
the section as in like individually or.
So yeah, we just read through this. So for example, like this one is going to be from 2 to. So we're going to start at 2 and end on. Oh wait, Mom, I'm not screen sharing this. I'm sorry. That's the part I forgot. How do I share screen? Your entire screen. Share. You guys can see this in a second. Okay. Are you guys able to?
We can see an infinite loop, and now we can see it.
All right, cool. So yeah, so for this, so how it's going to go, we're going to start at 2. Whoops. We're going to start at this 2, and then we're going to go ahead on to stop where it's 3, and then we're just kind of going to talk about it once we're done reading. So we're going to read it over, and then. So does anyone want to read it? Or I can read it if no one else wants to.
I feel like I'm in high school again.
Yeah, popcorn reading. It's how it goes.
Yeah.
All right, I can give it a shot for the first paragraph.
Sure. That sounds.
Yeah, why don't we split this up by paragraphs? That way our voices get.
Yeah, that works.
Does anyone not want to read before we start, or are we all cool with taking turns?
No, I'm cool.
All right.
All right, go ahead, Patrick.
I don't consent to reading.
The question now is as to a criterion by which we may securely distinguish a pure from an empirical cognition. Experience, no doubt, teaches us that this or that object is constituted in such and such a manner, but not that it could not possibly exist otherwise. Now, in the first place, if we have a proposition which contains the idea of necessity in its very conception, it's a judgment a priori. If, moreover, it is not derived from any other proposition, unless from one equally involving the idea of necessity, it is absolutely a priori. Secondly, an empirical judgment never exhibits strict and absolute, but only assumed and comparative universality by induction. Therefore, the most we can say is, so far as we have hitherto observed, there is no exception to this or that rule. If, on the other hand, a judgment carries with it strict and absolute universality, that is, admits of no possible exception, it is not derived from experience, but is valid absolutely a priori.
All right. I guess I'll take it away with the second paragraph. Empirical universality is, therefore, only an arbitrary extension of validity, for that which may be predicated of a proposition valid in most cases to that which is asserted of a proposition which holds good in all, as, for example, in the affirmation, all bodies are heavy. When, on the contrary, strict universality characterizes judgment, it necessarily indicates another peculiar source of knowledge, namely, a faculty of cognition a priori. Necessity and strict universality, therefore, are infallible tests for distinguishing pure from empirical knowledge and are inseparably connected with each other. But, as in the use of these criteria, the empirical limitation is sometimes more easily detected than the contingency of the judgment, or the unlimited universality which we attach to a judgment is often more convincing proof than its necessity. It may be advisable to use the criteria separately, each being by itself infallible.
Okay, I'll do the third part. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, it's dense, but we'll go over it in a bit.
Now that in the sphere of human cognition we have judgments which are necessary, and in the strictest sense universal, consequently pure a priori, it will be an easy matter to show. If we desire an example from the sciences, we need only take any proposition in mathematics. If we cast our eyes upon the commonest operations of the understanding, the proposition every change must have a cause will amply serve our purpose. In the latter case, indeed, the conception of a cause so plainly involves the conception of a necessity of connection, a conception of a necessity of connection with an effect and of a strict universality of the law, that the very notion of a cause would entirely disappear were we to derive it, like Hume, from a frequent association of what happens with that which precedes, and the habit thence originating of connecting representations, the necessity inherent in the judgment being therefore merely subjective. Besides, without seeking for such examples of principles existing a priori in cognition, we might easily show that such principles are the indispensable basis of the possibility of experience itself, and consequently prove their existence a priori. For whence could our experience itself acquire certainty, if all the rules on which it depends were themselves empirical and consequently fortuitous? No one, therefore, can admit the validity of the use of such rules as first principles. But for the present, we may content ourselves with having established the fact that we do possess and exercise a faculty of pure a priori cognition, and secondly, with having pointed out the proper tests of such cognition, namely universality and necessity.
All right. I think Ben's up if you still want to read.
It's the last paragraph.
Mm-hmm.
I'm good. Thank you for
okay.
the opportunity, though.
Okay, no problem.
Oh, I guess it cycles back to me then.
There you go.
Okay. Not only in judgments, however, but even in conceptions is an a priori origin manifest. For example, if we take away by degrees from our conceptions of a body all that can be referred to mere sensuous experience, color, hardness, or softness, weight, even impenetrability, the body will then vanish, but the space which it occupied still remains. And this it is utterly impossible to annihilate in thought. Again, if we take away in like manner from our empirical conception of any object, corporeal or incorporeal, all properties which mere experience has taught us to connect with it, we cannot think away that through which we cogitate it as a substance, or adhering to substance, although our conception of substance is more determined than that of an object. Compelled, therefore, by that necessity with which the conception of substance forces itself upon us, we must confess that it has its seat in our faculty of cognition a priori.
Let's go. All right.
All right, so that last part was actually pretty cool. I was digging that.
Yeah. So, yeah, you can analyze that, but I'd like to first just kind of go sequentially.
Yeah.
So to start out, right? So last time we were talking about a priori, a posteriori stuff, and we get a little more depth here, at least when it comes to a priori. We get a criterion, as Kant says, which is kind of cool because, you know, when you're divvying things up and such, you want to have an idea of exactly what you're doing and why you're doing it and where you're putting things, how things are being categorized. So it talks about a priori judgments being necessity in its very conception, right? So a priori judgments, they are these necessary things. I'm trying to think of like an example. He gives more examples, right? So right here, I don't even have to come up with myself. All bodies
So
are
for
heavy.
necessity, 2 plus 2 equals 4.
Yeah, there
That's
you go.
necessarily
Mathematical
true.
necessity. All bodies are heavy. Physical necessity. So
It does give the necessity all bodies are heavy, but in my mind, that is a terrible example because the term body is not an unambiguous definition,
yeah,
right?
that's true. Yeah, I think we going by the context of the
Certainly with
science at the
modern
time.
physics.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, yes. So necessity is one of these criteria here.
Like,
And
would the sky is blue be an a priori?
well, could you imagine the sky being red?
No.
You couldn't imagine it?
Or, oh, I guess I
New
guess
York
I
is
could,
just
but
seeing
like,
it.
yeah, okay, I guess I could imagine.
So that's the core. I guess if we want to use like modern philosophical terminology, well, I don't know if this is necessarily modern, but people like to say logical necessity. A lot of the times, this is logically possible, logically impossible thought experiments. That's kind of I think what is being gotten at here.
Okay.
So anything imaginable is definitely going to be possible in the philosophical sense, meaning it doesn't contradict itself. But some things maybe aren't even imaginable, but are still possible. For instance, a quadrillion donuts. I just don't have the capacity to imagine that many donuts. I would just imagine, I don't know, maybe 5,000, and then I have no idea how many donuts there are anymore, right? But
Right.
still, it certainly, there's nothing about the idea of there being 5 quadrillion donuts that says there couldn't be. But there seems to be something about the idea of a square circle that says, hey, that doesn't make sense.
Okay. All right. I think kind of getting it.
Yeah. So these things that are just logically necessary, right? Square cannot be a circle, right? That's a necessary kind of as Patrick was pointing at there. We can't. That's something that's a square circle, logically impossible. Doesn't make sense by definition. And I think we're going to go in more into that a little later in the text as we bring in more examples and things like that. So a priori, if it's necessary, logically necessary, a priori. If it's contingent, I don't think he explicitly states it here, but to my knowledge, we can throw that in the a posteriori pile, right? At least for like the basics. I'm sure we could get into a little. I know there's some controversial
One
things
second,
like
let
later
me
on.
check. Let me check. So, yeah, if it's contingent, it must be a posteriori.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I just wanted to. Yeah, that's good. We made sure. Yeah, so that's essentially So before I used more of like a shallow example, or not like definition, whereas like if it's abstract in thought, whatever, a priori. If it's physical, a posteriori. And while that is like a helpful way to think about it for the beginning, now we're getting a little more depth and rigor in our definition, where we kind of say, okay, yes, logically necessary, a priori, if it's contingent, which is why physicality, the physical world, is viewed by Kant as a posteriori, because especially in this time in modern philosophy, the physical world was, especially by the rationalists, totally being like torn apart, right? Unreliable, whatever. So definitely, especially still in Kant's eyes, definitely contingent. Post-Kantian thought that changed a little bit, and I don't want to get too much into that now, but for Kant's conception, yeah, lots of physical things. Contingent, although not everything. He does bring up, for example, all bodies are heavy. Like I said, even maybe not the best example now, but in his time, that was a physically.
All right. Well, so Kant was saying that all physical things are a priori.
No, that's
No.
not what he's saying.
So the way I'm thinking, so here's, let's take this apart. Couple things. First of all, let's just review the notion of a priori. I think I've got another example, or more like a description here.
Okay.
If your mind looks at something and
Right.
goes, error, does not compute, it just,
Right.
you can't even think about it because it doesn't make any sense on a fundamental logical level. That is something that you would consider necessary, right? It's necessary if to do the opposite would be error does not compute, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, when Kant is saying all bodies are heavy, the reason he uses that example is because at the time, the definition of body he was using included the idea of being heavy. So by
Right.
definition, they were all heavy. For instance, by definition, bachelors are single. So if you were to think, oh, a married bachelor, right,
Right. That's
that
not
doesn't
on
compute.
there.
It's
Right.
necessary that all bachelors are single because it's part of the definition.
Right. Now, you may be led to believe that what Kant means by a priori is, okay, I guess maybe logically true also means like definitionally true. And that is a common avenue of thought to go down. However, one of the reasons the length of this work as long as it is because although, yes, definite things that are definitionally true, yes, they are a priori, but there's another side of a priori that we're going to get to that interestingly enough, does not include definitions, but are still logically necessary. And I'll just leave that at that, and we'll
So
explore that a little later.
I will summarize that concisely,
Yeah.
which is that if it's true by definition, it is necessary.
Yes.
But according to Kant, the reverse isn't true. Not everything that's necessary is true by definition.
Right.
Does that make
yes.
sense?
Thank you. That is a very good summary. And that last part, some people question or like, how does that even work? Kant will address us how that works later on. So we will get to that. So everyone, all good with that? Following up to this point.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Awesome. So we covered that first paragraph. We got a little bit in that second paragraph. Let's see. Right. Necessarity, strict universality, therefore infallible test for distinguishing pure from empirical knowledge, right? Because empirical knowledge, right? Contingent, physical, empirical things aren't logically necessary, right? Nothing says that, for example, like anything physical has to exist logically, right? Because logic is sort of this abstract, non-physical thing. So he's definitely endorsing that view here, but as in these criteria, empirical limitation.
Okay, let's move forward. So necessity is one aspect of it, right?
Yeah.
Another aspect he talks about though is universality.
Right. Yeah. That's what I was actually just crossing over here, thinking about how to explain it. But do you want to go into that at all, Patrick?
Universality means that it's always true for everything.
Right.
All the time. So regardless of if you're talking about two sheep or two planets or two rubber bands, when you put two and two of them together, it makes four.
Right. And that's not contingent upon anything, right? It's universally true no matter where you are,
always
what
true.
you are, who you are, what you're thinking. It has universality.
It's true everywhere all the time.
Yeah, exactly. And he says
Square has four sides.
Mm-hmm. And,
up is not down.
Yeah, and if you can prove something is universal, Kant says it's more convincing of a proof than its necessity. Actually, now I'm thinking about it, I don't know how that important is to touch on. Since convincingness, I guess, is...
I don't... that sounds like just his opinion.
Yeah. I was like, wait, that sounds kind of deep, but then I'm like, wait, no, that's not really... that's not something we can...
I don't think it's important. A lot of his asides aren't, to be honest.
Yeah. So...
And here's the thing, the paragraphs themselves are dense.
Mm-hmm.
That's because... like, if you could take 7 paragraphs, it would contain the entire meat of the critique.
Yeah.
He just repeats himself so much.
He does, yeah.
He feels the need to say his entire thesis at every point.
Yeah, which, I mean, depending on, like, how you're reading, what may be helpful, may not be, may just be redundant. So, take of that what you will.
I'm personally not a fan, but it's very important.
Yeah. For him, he wrote it. It is important to him. So he brings up the example, right? Exactly. The science of take any proposition from mathematics. Okay. So this is interesting. Am I getting? Omar wants to join. Awesome. Let me just admit him into here real quick.
Omar.
Hey, Omar.
Look who it is.
It's the gang. It's the transcendental idealist gang. going over.
Is
Hey,
Matt, Jonathan, how are you guys?
hey man, how are you?
I'm not so bad.
How are you?
In Atlanta right now. Patrick, you said your brother was there, right?
Yeah, he is.
He's older or
He's younger.
younger? Was studying or
He's with his girlfriend who is in law school.
interesting.
Very cool. Yeah. So right now we are in just the second part of the introduction. Patrick found us a nice new translation to use because the Cambridge edition, which is the one that was assigned in Lee's classes, we found to be a little incomprehensible for self-study.
Really?
So,
Okay.
yeah. So we found us this new edition, which we went over, and we're in the second part, which this translation calls the human intellect, even in an unphilosophical state, is in possession of certain cognitions a priori. Going over all the good examples, controversial, all bodies are heavy, mathematics, 2 + 2 = 4, a priori is necessity, universality, all that good stuff.
Okay, let me try and get this up and beam this to my laptop.
Are you able to see the screen share?
Yeah, I can see the screen share.
Okay, cool.
All right, I'm gonna leave and then try and rejoin on my computer.
Sure.
See guys.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
fine.
So you wanted to talk about an example of universality?
I thought it was kind of clear, unless you want to do that.
Oh no, I thought it was clear too.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I was going to move on to this. I think this is interesting. The every change must have a cause bit in this.
Okay.
Paragraph.
Well, I'm just gonna read through and see if there's anything else I think is
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
important. Assessing infallible. Yeah, that's pretty redundant.
Yeah. Classic Kant fashion.
Like that second paragraph there is just the first again.
Right. Yeah. That's what I mean. I'm like, we kind of skipped over this paragraph, but we kind of covered stuff from the first paragraph.
We have judgments. Okay. Consequently, okay. Be an easy matter to show. Every change must have a cause. Yeah. I agree with you. That's the next thing we should focus on.
Cool. So, and on the next page, I think, So he talks about how Hume derived, right? Because Hume's whole, well, maybe not his whole, but perhaps his most significant contribution to philosophy that I know is his
problem induction.
Yeah, there you go. I was gonna think of some fancy skeptical way to say it, but yeah, so that was thrown into huge question with his works, treatise on human knowledge, and I forget what the other one is called, but essentially his point is that we kind of just from experience derive cause and effect, but it's not a reliable piece of knowledge because we're just sort of arbitrarily throwing causes and effects together, and it doesn't correspond to reality necessarily. Right? So that's kind of his thing, right? It's arbitrary. It's not necessary. It's contingent. Therefore, we can't call it knowledge, and that's his huge problem. I don't know if you want to go into that more, or if that is a good summary.
I think it's very important to go into that more.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
To be honest.
Okay. Go ahead.
But for context, who here has read some Hume?
I have never read any Hume, admittedly.
Okay. just wanted to have some context. So, the example Hume uses, and I cannot remember which of his two major treatises it is, but the example I read deals with bread.
Balls? Oh, no, never mind.
Yeah, he uses bread, for example. So you are a guy. You have eaten bread. You expect that when you eat bread, it will sate your hunger to some degree, right?
Right.
Well, what's that based on?
Experience?
That's true. Past experience. But here's what Hume is saying. We have this past experience, the experience that I eat bread, right? And then my hunger is sated.
Mm-hmm.
But where does the idea that the bread caused my hunger to be sated come from? Right? What actually happened was a sequence of events, right?
Mm-hmm.
You remember that you ate bread, and then you remember being sated. but it doesn't necessarily follow that the bread was the cause of the state. Have you heard of Pavlov's dog, for instance?
Yeah.
Right. So in Pavlov's dog, I think illustrates this principle really well, because Pavlov,
Yeah, that's
of course,
a good
rings the
example.
bell and brings out the food,
Right.
and the dog salivates. Well, the dog, who's always experienced food after the bell, might think that the bell causes food to come into existence. But that's obviously
Okay.
false. They just experience it constantly, one thing after the other.
Right.
Now, one thing I sort of responded to Professor Lee with when I read about this is, okay, but it's always worked that way in the past, so why should I expect things to be any different? But then he brings up something that really spooked me. It's based on the assumption that the future will resemble the past. But how do I know that the future will resemble the past? Because it's always done so in the past. That's circular.
Yeah.
Yes, any past pasts.
That
Well,
sounds very
past.
like eternal returny, or like Nietzsche sort of. But yeah,
Well,
Yeah,
it,
not
it
even
messes
that.
with your sense of time. But
Yeah.
but if I say the sun will come up tomorrow, right? That's based on my past experience. The sun has come up the day before and the day before and the day before. But where do I get the idea that the future is going to resemble the past? Well, it's only from the past. So what if the future has only resembled the past in the past?
So that's kind of So that's the big spooky notion that was put forth by Hume in his. He put it forth in a few works, but the treatise on human knowledge is the one that I know it from. Yeah.
So basically,
and
the
that's
fundamental
what
idea here is there seems to be no rational reason for believing that anything causes anything else.
Right, the big problem of induction, cause and effect, and that's what Kant is setting out to respond to here, and that's why he brings up Hume, right? Because he's bringing up examples, right, of a priori necessary things that are logically necessary, right? Knowledge, logically necessary knowledge, I guess if you want to put it that way, and then he brings up cause and effect, and then if you're reading this at that time, you're like, wait, Hume just said, right? You just kind of pointed out that that's not something we can say. It's necessary knowledge. It's not a priori. It's just contingent. Not even it's just arbitrary, right? We're just throwing causes and effect together on this faith-based, induction process that Patrick was illustrating before. So that's what Kant wants to respond to here. So he says, in the latter case, indeed, the conception of a cause so plainly involves conception of necessity. Conception of a necessity of connection with an effect, and of a strict universality of the law, that the very notion of a cause would entirely disappear. We're ready to derive it, like Hume, from a frequent association, what happens with which that proceeds, and the habit thence originating of connecting representations, the necessity inherent in the judgment being therefore merely subjective. So what Kant is saying here is we can't do it like Hume's doing. We need he's arguing, well, not fully yet, but we'll get there more. But he's implying here that there's something more going on with cause and effect. It's not just what Hume did. It's not just a frequent association of the past. There's something there's something necessary and universal going on with cause and effect. It's not just subjective. If it were, Hume would be right, and we'd have to throw everything away. But Kant wants to show that's not what it is. Does anyone have any other thoughts? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question for you, Matt.
Yeah.
At this stage, does this look to you like an argument or an assertion?
No, yeah, that's kind of what it's like, an argument, but he doesn't really go into it. Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at. It's an assertion, right? It's in the introduction still. That's kind of what he's.
That's sort of what it appears to me, but
Okay.
I think there actually is an argument.
Oh,
here.
okay, great. Yeah, if you want to.
So, to get really granular here, right? He
Yeah.
says, if we cast upon the commonest notion of the understanding, every change must have a cause, may amply serve our purpose.
Mhm.
Okay, so that's the proposition.
Right.
In the latter case, indeed, the conception of a cause, the latter case meaning that proposition,
Mhm.
the conception of a cause involves the conception of a necessity of connection with effect. So what he's saying here is the very idea that there is such a thing as a cause involves the necessity of a connection with an effect, meaning that every effect, every change has a cause, is involved by the premise that there's such a thing as cause at all.
Can you call a brute fact an argument there? I mean, that's pretty what he's saying. He's just
that's what I was.
No, actually, it's an argument which is contingent. It's contingent
sure,
upon
right.
the idea that we accept that there is such an idea as cause, right?
Mm.
Right. Well, that's
So he hasn't proven that there is such a thing as cause, but he has proven that if there is a cause,
if there is a cause, then it would
then it's necessary,
yeah.
right? And so what he's saying is, when we have Hume, right? Hume is saying we derive the idea of cause from constant conjunction, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
But Kant is saying that cannot be the case. Because the constant conjunction involves no necessity. But the idea of cause involves necessity.
Yeah.
Right.
Does that make sense to you guys?
No, it does. It does. And I think that was good to kind of go into. But, yeah, okay, good, yeah.
So it doesn't prove that there are causes,
right,
but it proves that if there are causes, they are not derived a posteriori empirically, like Hume says.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By definition, at least.
Yeah, so so I was sort of going with the latter of what you were saying. Right, that Kant is sort of implying that there's more to cause, he's implying that there are causes, right? So I think that's what I interpret it as. But yes, I do think that's an important argument, actually, that I didn't pick up on there. So
he does imply that there are causes, but that at this stage is
right.
assertion.
That's right. So yeah,
that he does not argue that yet.
Yeah, right. So that's why I want to point out. But that's also a good thing what you brought up. And Ayah has joined us. Welcome. You're muted, by the way. I don't know if you're aware, but thank you for joining us. Hello.
Hello.
Welcome. So right now, to catch you up a little bit, we're on the second part of the introduction of this nice and readable translation that Patrick has found us of A Critique of Pure Reason. We've gone over the first few paragraphs that kind of go into more rigorous definition and description of what a priori is, sort of how you can tell if something is a priori, necessity and universality, that sort of stuff. And we're going over examples, and that line of examples has brought us to the very philosophically significant concept of cause and effects. And we talked about David Hume and his theory of what cause and effect is and how it's formed versus what Kant's is, and Kant's arguments that cause implies effect by necessity, and he's implying here too that there are causes, but he hasn't gotten to the point yet, and we're going to get there later, of how we know there are causes for sure, based on our cognition. So that's a little summary of what we've done so far. We just finished that third paragraph. Are you able to see the screen share, Ayah?
Yeah, I can see them.
Awesome. So that's where we are now, and we're gonna. Was there anything else in the third paragraph that we wanted to touch upon?
Let me.
Yeah, I'm reading.
Could you zoom in a bit?
What's that?
Could you zoom in a bit?
Yeah. Is this?
Yeah. That's good.
Cool.
Okay. Yeah. So this is actually where he sort of backs up what I was saying here about. He says at the end of the paragraph, no one therefore can admit the validity of the use of such rules as first principles. Meaning, we can't say that there are causes as a first principle. But for the present, we may content ourselves with having established the fact that we do possess and exercise a faculty of pure a priori cognition, meaning that empiricism, in its strictest sense, is false.
Right, but he's also not going the Spinoza route, right? Where he's like, or maybe not, I don't know if Spinoza was an example to bring up. He's the first one that came to mind. But like the rationalist thing, right? Yep, maybe Leibniz is a better example. I'm not sure. But causes. Yep, for sure, guys. Let's do causes, right? He's not just jumping at it either, which is sort of a precursor to. It's a little foreshadowing, maybe is a better word, as to how he's a much more original position than these two.
Matt, this is what I'm reading now. I started reading it. Can you see?
It's a little blurry. Sorry.
Oh, it's selections, philosophy of Spinoza.
Oh, okay.
It's basically, but
Nice.
So basically, he's just saying, hey, we don't know that causes and stuff work, but we do know that we have ideas before we interact with the world. That tabula rasa thing Locke was talking about, blank slate, nah.
Yeah, right. So empiricism, not totally on it, but we can't just jump in like the rationalists are doing and just assume cause either. We got to do a little more work for that, which will bring us to a very interesting place. And I think that unless there's anything else you want to touch to in this last little sentence here,
sounds good to
you
me.
can jump onto the fourth paragraph. So I'm just gonna reread this real quick, and then anyone with thought can just jump in if I don't jump in first.
Yeah, so that first sentence is really...
Yeah.
He's already using terminology which he will never define for you. You have to infer it.
That is also in classic Kantian fashion.
Yes, I don't know what his problem is. This is just... I think he could just define the terminology. But so he says, not only in judgments, however, but even in conceptions is an a priori form manifest. So this is an important point of Kantian terminology. Judgment refers to basically you think of a judgment as a verdict. Is this true or not? Right? Is this idea true? Is this thing that I'm thinking of real?
Statement,
yeah, well, it doesn't actually need to be falsifiable.
Oh, okay.
2 + 2 = 4. That's not falsifiable. There are no conditions on when it's wrong, right?
Well, I thought falsifiable was like you can tell whether it is false or not, but I don't know, maybe that's a wrong definition of it.
No, falsifiable means that there are empirical conditions which would prove the statement false.
Oh,
so only empirical knowledge is subject to falsifiability.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, I just had a wrong definition there. My bad. But yeah, the way you put it, yeah, is good. Yeah.
So, but basically, what that is it's easier to see when you think about conceptions. So, conceptions, guys, think about a unicorn. Congrats, you have a conception. Now, tell me, is that unicorn real or not? You don't even need to tell me. Just think, is the unicorn real or not?
I don't know, man.
That is a judgment.
That's a judgment.
Yeah, I don't know. It basically is a judgment, yeah.
Conception, or it doesn't have to be a thing. It's raining now. Okay, maybe it's raining, maybe it's not. Judgment, is it actually raining now?
No, not where I am.
Not where I am either. So a judgment basically...
How are you defining judgment then?
A judgment it makes a statement as to the truth or falsity of a proposition. The conception is merely the proposition itself, if that makes sense. I think that's the best way I have to define it.
I think that's a really good way to think about it. Does that make sense, Ben? You are muted, just in case you didn't know, Ben.
Judgment. I mean, is he using?
I got it.
I mean, I think he's using judgment here generally, but he's not using it as like judgment, as in like the unity of a perception, like that as a judgment.
No,
you know what I mean?
Like talking about
we're not there yet. Yeah.
Every kind of judgment. Any kind of
just
judgment.
saying in general.
Whatever I'm saying is true or false,
Yeah.
or exists or doesn't, or whatever. Such and such actually is such and such.
Oh, so do you think like judgment of perception is itself like a necessarily is a judgment of truth? Like
so
when
a
you
judgment, yes, a judgment.
Like when you perceive the table.
Falsity.
Like when you perceive the table, are you saying that?
No, a judgment is cognitive for Kant. It's a faculty
exactly,
of cognition.
Right. So even that perception, right, is cognitive, right? Do you know what I mean? Like when you
that's a complicated question. But
I think he's using it more generally here. So I think like that kind of judgment is different, maybe.
Yeah,
I think that's something you would get into when we actually talk.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to. Yeah, I think with that
cool,
later.
Cool.
Yeah, I think that's a good, just basic thing for now. We can get accurate, general definition of judgment and conception. But yeah, so going with that, right? He makes an interesting statement here. there is an a priori origin manifest. So even in our conceptions, even like right a priori we're talking about necessarity, universality. So these are things we could associate right with just judgments, but Kant's saying here no. Even just in the conceptions, a priori there is an a priori origin manifest. And he brings up an example, right? Take away by degrees from our conceptions of body. All of the sensuous things, right? Color, hardness, softness, weight, right? All these kind of Lockean, you could say, qualities. The body will vanish, but the space in which it is occupied remains. And we can't annihilate space from our thought. And this is a huge Kantian.
Yeah, that's a really cool fucking.
Yeah. Oh, that's what you're talking about, John. Yeah. So space. Yeah, space for Kant. Foundational.
Well, it's like an innate faculty of the mind. For
Right.
Kant,
Yeah,
right?
it is.
Exactly,
That's exactly what
yeah.
it's saying. It's it's an a priori origin manifest. What is that a priori origin? A priori origin. Sorry, I'm not pronouncing it very well. It's space. At least that's one of them, right? I think we'll go into time a little later, but in the transcendental aesthetic. But yeah, huge thing right there. Huge drop. Space is huge, and this comes right after cause and effect. So if we use some context clues, we can say, okay, space might play a part.
What's the do we know what the scientific consensus is at this point?
About what?
Space,
About
like
space.
is
This is
about
more the geometrical, I think, mathematical concept of space rather than the.
So what about space are you asking?
Meaning, like, do we have like a Newtonian understanding? I mean, we're obviously not.
We do not have a Newtonian understanding of space.
Cool.
That's definitely not the case. There's definitely Newtonian understanding.
It's like what
there's such a thing as an absolute idea of space, right?
Yeah.
But
so this is pretty. Yeah.
No, but here's the thing that's important to keep in mind when you're reading Kant, and why I think it's still applicable regardless of the science.
Because I think it's pretty prescient.
Because physics is models.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
Physics are models of experience.
Not
right
of the world. Yeah.
Not reality itself. And so this inquiry is, what is space in itself? And of course, Kant's answer is that it isn't in itself.
Yeah.
So really, what Kant would say about relativity, relativity does not destroy Kant. But what Kant would say, if he had access to relativity, is, okay, so in order to predict our future experiences of space, we have to model space in a way that we couldn't experience.
Yeah.
But that doesn't make those models true in themselves either.
Yeah. Just as it pertains to out perception or experience perception.
I don't think that like, if you're struggling to understand the Kant, I don't think you need to understand that. That's a pretty finer point of like
that's a whole
how science interacts with Kant.
Yeah, I'm
that's
just
a
curious.
whole area of inquiry research. That is super.
This is where ChatGPT comes in.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, there are some people who would, I guess, disagree with what I just put forth, but
yeah, they're definitely.
I will argue.
Camp, yeah.
I will argue them to the teeth. I think this is something I feel pretty clear on.
No, yeah, I'm with you there. Yeah, I don't think that destroys Kant at all. Yeah, I agree totally with what you said. But
wait. So
yeah.
How is Kant defining space here then? What is he actually saying?
Kant does not yet define space, but how Kant will define space is as a characteristic of our perception, which he describes in various ways. But he cannot give a logical definition of space itself, because space for him is not a concept but an intuition. So he can describe the characteristics of space, but he can't give you the conception of space because it's not a concept to begin with. It's an experience.
But so space, right? I mean, space is the thing in which the body is. Is that sort of to?
Yes. So that's true, but that's really more like pointing to something,
right?
And then defining.
It's like the condition by which the body is.
But wouldn't space have to be intuited like from experience?
So what Kant says,
he's going to talk about.
Again, you're this is pretty far ahead, but just like as a preview, what Kant does say about this is that you do have to actually have an experience to experience space. However, it's still a priori, because whatever experience you have, space will apply universally and necessarily. So it's a precondition. It's logically prior, though not prior in time.
Okay.
But yeah, we're getting into the meat of it now. I'm glad we're moving beyond a priori, posteriori.
Unfortunately, it gets a lot worse before it gets better.
Yeah, it's true.
It does
Well,
get better though, because, like I said, he repeats himself. So once you understand what the hell he's on about,
you'll
it all
continue understanding.
what the hell he's on about. Yeah.
I read his What is Enlightenment, and I really loved that.
I have not read that, but
Yeah, I
I've
also
heard of
haven't
it.
read that one.
I've heard of it. And
It's like really clear and concise, honestly, but compared to Critique of Pure Reason.
did you write it later on? I wonder. A lot of
Well,
philosophers
I don't know.
get clearer if they don't have clear writing from the start. It gets clearer as they go on.
Well, it was also likely a popular work, whereas the Critique of Pure
Oh, it's
Reason
for like
is self-consciously academic.
Yeah, which is annoying, and I don't like it when philosophers do that. But that's often what they do. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, I get it.
Yeah.
Like,
well, for something like this, I guess there's a point where it has to be. Although, I don't know. I always bring up like Schopenhauer as like a counterexample. It's like yeah, sometimes you need it, but like
Same with
sometimes you
Heidegger. He's like,
I've not read Heidegger. I'm kind of waiting after Hegel to read the post.
yeah, very chronological for me.
Me too, yeah.
But
that's how the ideas make sense for me. I like to read.
Hegel is just as dense as Kant, but the difference
Hegel
is
much more dense than Kant, I think.
Yeah, that's true. He is actually much more. Well, his paragraphs are slightly more dense than Kant. His book is incredibly more dense than Kant because he doesn't repeat himself.
Yeah, it's like the opposite problem.
But well, it's not even a problem for me though because it's just so fascinating.
Yeah, it is.
You could think about every sentence he says for a solid 10 minutes.
Yeah, it's great. How far are you? I'm wondering if there's anything else that we wanted to go over.
Well, we should probably summarize.
Yeah, for sure. I was just wondering in this last paragraph.
Oh, okay.
No, he kind of just repeats that space is like necessary.
Yep, he is repetitive.
Mm-hmm. And then okay, and then he's just like, okay, yep. Now that we're compelled that space is necessary, we must confess it is a priori. Okay, so that's all very clear and direct, and I don't think it needs explanation. So yeah, we kind of just, it was cool. We went, I think we got a better definition of a priori, right? Really understood thoroughly what that is compared to a posteriori with.
Yeah, he gave criterion.
Yeah,
there's two. Necessary,
yeah.
Universal, necessary.
Boom.
It's a priori,
Mm-hmm.
universal. That also means it's a priori. And
Yeah.
guess what? We do have a priori concepts. So suck it, Locke. Because if we didn't have a priori concepts, then how come by me saying that something is caused, I imply that there's effects for every cause?
And hey, why is well, we'll get to why 2 + 2 is 4, I guess, but 2 + 2 is 4. Suck it. And actually, I don't know. Mathematics, I feel like empiricists have always been like, yeah, it's all right. I don't know. There's always been a mixed relationship with that.
Well, yeah, they tend to say it's like it's relations of ideas, which we acquire after the. I mean, I would say yes, they are. It is relations of ideas. Kant agrees with that.
Yeah, but where they come from is sort of the point of contention there.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they, I guess, don't think it's. Maybe they think it's necessary, but not universal. I guess.
One thing that's
from our experience.
Honestly, so this is going to be incredibly obscure, okay. But have you ever heard of Leibniz's new dialogues concerning human understanding?
I don't think it's new. No, not new dialogues. I never.
So yeah, you've heard of the original. What it's riffing off of its Locke's. So what Leibniz does is he responds to Locke and defends the ideas, the concept of innate ideas, and he pretty much goes, like, not exactly line by line, but he tries to address every point that Locke brings up.
Right.
And so what I noticed from the dialogue is that Locke and Leibniz appear to be appear to not have some kind of common definition of what an innate idea is. Which Locke says, for instance, that like, oh, it's not an innate idea if not everybody knows it, because it's not inherent
Right.
if you had to learn it. But what Leibniz says is no, of course you had to learn it and not everyone would agree with it. But rather there is this inherent tendency within the idea, that within the human mind, that makes it inherent. And so it's not clear that Locke would disagree with that. It might
Yeah.
just be a verbal dispute that they're having.
Oh, okay.
So
So the sort of core of what makes rationalists and empirics different when it comes to innate ideas is just a lack of understanding, like.
potentially.
Okay.
Potentially,
Yeah,
it is ambiguous. It is
Okay.
ambiguous.
For sure.
But I think Kant is making a lot of ideas more spelled out.
Right, which only enhances understanding and solves those kinds of problems. Which is great.
Yeah.
So that's cool. I'm glad we got that a priori definition going, got those examples going, and we finished up with the very philosophically controversial, or at least at this point, in the history of philosophy, controversial concept, cause and effect, right? Bringing up Hume, his whole spiel about it being just relation of ideas caused by the past, which is there because of the past, and the paradox of induction, and then Kant's like, nope, and he brings up a little interesting argument where cause necessarily implies effect, but we're not there yet as to how we know we can have causes. And then
True.
Yep. Then we bring up space. A priori, right? Kant will say. Whoops.
He will say that.
Yeah.
He will say it's an a priori intuition.
Right.
He will actually say it's a pure intuition.
Well,
but
we haven't
pure
gotten
means
to
the
it.
exact same thing as a priori.
Right. Yes, it does. It does.
So
we actually
it's
haven't
just
gotten
to be
to
confusing.
intuitions yet, but yes, that is what he will say eventually.
That is what he will say eventually.
Yeah, we'll move on to that in a little bit. It looks like the previous next section talking about God, freedom, and immortality, the big three problems plaguing modern philosophy. So we'll get to that, and we'll bring a priori and space and cause and effect all into that in the future. So I think this was a pretty good session. Does anyone want to say anything else before we officially close out here?
Fun stuff.
I agree. Ben, got any input? You're muted, by the way, so I don't know if you were saying anything. We just missed your thoughts here.
Yeah, no, I
Okay.
got nothing.
Okay. All right. Awesome. Well, guys, thank you for joining me. Thank you to all the others who were here in the past. Omar, Ayah, Jonathan. I think that was everyone. So, yeah, great. Awesome. And hopefully we can see more people next time for next episode of Critique of Purities. All right. I'm just going to end this recording, but if we want to stay on and talk, whatever we can. So I'll end the recording, and yeah, awesome. Yep. Cool stuff, guys.